Statements by Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the day that everyone had hoped would never come, knowing fully well that time was drawing nigh, has indeed arrived. And sadly, I rise to officially indicate that our late great Prime Minister, most excellent Edward Philip George Seaga, passed earlier today. Mr. Speaker, there is no easy way for anyone to prepare themselves for a day like this. Not when we are dealing with a monumental man such as Edward Seaga was. His life was a life devoted to the development of the Jamaican people and the country at large, and it extended throughout the world. It is not my intention today, Mr. Speaker, to give a tribute in the fullest way that is demanded of someone who has known him personally for the last 50 years. But I will at a later stage, when we convene to do that kind of honor and pay those respects to the late Prime Minister. However, it is fair to say that his knowledge and devotion to the Jamaican people through its culture and all aspects of the Jamaican life is second only to his undying love for the people of Jamaica, especially the most vulnerable in our country. The impact of his life and the contribution that he made to this country will be felt for generations to come. Mr. Speaker, to his family, to his wife, Carla, and to his children, Christopher, Annabelle, Andrew, and Gabrielle, this Parliament extends our deepest condolences. To his other members of his family and his wide circle of friends and devoted persons, to him and to the legacy that he leaves behind, we also extend our sincerest condolences. May his soul rest in peace and light perpetually shine on him. The Prime Minister will make, Mr. Speaker, a statement that will outline the way forward in the immediate future leading to the final interment of Mr. Seaga. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was with great sadness that earlier today I informed the nation of the passing of the Most Honorable Edward Philip George Seaga, the 5th Prime Minister of Jamaica. Mr. Seaga was ailing for some time. He was receiving treatment in the United States. He had his family close to him. Indeed, he had his family around him. Today marks the 89th birthday of Mr. Seaga. Mr. Seaga is a man who believes in the efficiency and dignity of the state. He is someone who adheres to protocol. And so I hold the view that he would have wanted the business of Parliament to continue. In another point of coincidence, today, the Minister of Local Government, who happens to be the Member of Parliament for West Kingston, the former constituency of the Most Honourable Edward Siaga, will be addressing the House. And as I look in the gallery, I see several of his former constituents also here today. Mr. Speaker, the state protocol has already been engaged, and arrangements are in place for the body of Mr. Siaga to be flown back to Jamaica at the earliest. We expect that he will be accompanied by his wife and other family members, and he will be received by the government with the appropriate honor guard in place. Thereafter, there will be a state funeral, and before that, his body will lie in state, and we will advise of a period of mourning. There will also be, Mr. Speaker, to be determined by the leader of government business in collaboration with the leader of opposition business, a special sitting of the House in which members can have tributes prepared and recorded in honor of Mr. Siaga. Mr. Speaker, it is a personally trying time for me, and I know it is also a very trying time for his family. And though they were prepared, and though I was prepared, at the point of the event, you still can't help but feel the emotional void that has been created by his passing. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to visit with him a few days ago before his passing, and though he was not in a position to speak for any long period, by virtue of his expressions, how he held my hands, and just looking in his eyes, he was satisfied that his legacy would be protected and enhanced, that his work and contribution to the development of this country would be respected. Mr. Speaker, in later life, he took a very passionate interest in football. And even in the distress of his illness, when we mentioned football, a broad smile came on his face. Mr. Speaker, all Jamaica should know that when I was about to leave the hospital room, I held his hands and he squeezed my hands and he said, "Thank you, Andrew, and tell the Jamaican people thanks for everything." He served this country for most of his life. He was in this parliament for over 40 years. He is truly a great Jamaican. Indeed, he participated in the framing of our Constitution and in the development of so many institutions which now define Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, I'm not intending to go any further, otherwise I will end up in a tribute. But may his soul rest in peace and light perpetually shine on his soul.
Mr. Falwell.
Mr. Speaker, the opposition shares in the sadness expressed earlier by the Leader of Government Business and the Prime Minister on the passing of the Most Honourable Edward Seaga. I firstly have to apologize for the absence of the Leader of the Opposition, who had a prior engagement and even now trying to get to Parliament, but he has expressed his regret as well. And I should also note that in conversation earlier with the Most Honourable Portia Simpson-Miller, who, as we all know, shared some special times with Mr. Seaga, she has also expressed her condolences to Mrs. the Most Honourable Carla Seaga and the rest of the family. Today, the opposition will pay brief tribute, and the member for Central Kingston will be the person who will do that on our behalf. But just to indicate, as the Prime Minister has said, there will be a special sit-in where the tributes will be far more elaborate and fulsome. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Traits.
Mr. Speaker, the entire opposition, and I believe all the people of Jamaica, join in the heartfelt expressions made so far. The emotion, the crack in the Prime Minister's voice was noted by us all, and we can appreciate the deep wrench that Mr. Seaga's death brings to him, to the members of the government, and particularly to the people who have been served for such a long time by our former Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the gate of death is one that all of us will have to pass through. The scriptures tell us that our span is 70, and by virtue of strength, 80. The Most Honourable Edward Seaga has lived to his 89th birthday. And we give thanks for his life. Our feelings at this time should not only be those of mourning, that is natural, that is human, but also of thanksgiving. Thanksgiving for a long and productive life. I had the opportunity to draw somewhat closer to Mr. Seaga during his retirement, and I came to admire his graciousness and his thoughtfulness and his willingness to go beyond the normal hurly-burly of partisan thinking and to display to me, a younger person, the true indelible national spirit which had caused him to dedicate his life for the causes that he saw would uplift the Jamaican people. We spent a lot of time particularly talking about the Heart Trust, one of the institutions that he had instigated and which he cherished its progress and its direction. The purposefulness of life is what gives its pedigree. And so today, our expressions are well-deserved. We should all bear in mind that, in a sense, his passing is but a reminder that each of us is going to face the ending of our life. What is eternity, Mr. Speaker? Eternity comes with the never death of the spirit which ennobles our physical life, which resides in the continuity of work and of effort by those who remember what this Jamaican has done. and we are also boasted in the faith that the spirit cannot die. As one watched Mr. Seaga age, one felt that his brain, his spirit, was so sharp, even as his body became so frail. I admired his strength. I admired the things that he would continue to say and do, and more so the things that he strove after, despite his physical infirmities. And that admiration transcended all of the differences, real and contrived, of the past. Mr. Speaker, what matters at this point? What matters is the good that has been done and our reliance on the faith that we shared and the forgiveness of the one who came and saved us all. Edward George Philip Seaga, on the victory of his party and his ascension as Prime Minister in 1980, one of his first acts was to go before the Lord and seek the confirmation of his Christian faith. I do not believe that he ever resiled from that. In fact, I know the contrary. And so today, it is to commend his soul to the one who made him, who saved him and sustained him, that all of us gather to give thanks. May it please you.
Minister Grange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some individuals make such a telling impact on people, on communities and countries, and Edward Seaga was one of them. He was the kindest, most caring, most brilliant man I've ever known, and I loved him dearly. It has been my greatest pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to learn from him and to work with him. He taught me to dine with kings and to walk with beggars and to give respect, to receive respect. Today, on his 89th birthday, Jamaica and the world lost a great leader, and I've lost my teacher, my mentor, and my friend. I give credit to Mr. Seaga for much that I have achieved in my professional life. He saw great potential in me when others did not. He saw great potential in many others from West Kingston when other people did not, and invested his time and effort into helping me and others to rise and to contribute to the country that we both love. Minister McKenzie and I were a living example of his investment. Mr. Seaga loved Jamaica, and he loved the Jamaican people. He understood the value of our culture and way of life in a way that few other people do. He slept 6 across a bed with the revivalists in Salt Lane and learned and understood what it was to be poor and humble. He dedicated his life to advancing Jamaica in every way, and we have become a cultural powerhouse worldwide because of Mr. Seaga's vision and service. All of us, especially those of us from West Kingston, we are heartbroken today, Mr. Speaker. He was closer than a brother. But in this moment, we are also proud to have benefited from, be associated with, and counted as family by Edward Seaga. And to us, he was and will always be family. Thank you for your service, Mr. Eddie. Thank you for loving us and working so hard for each of us every day. We will always love you. Mr. Speaker, last Tuesday, I was with Mr. Seaga. And someone was playing for him the song, Hard Man for Dead. And I said, Mr. Siaga, you don't want to dance? And him say, you're mad? And he didn't say much on that day. And the following day, when the Prime Minister visited him, he said few words, but he said very important words, as the Prime Minister said, to tell the people of Jamaica that he loved them. And on Sunday night, Mr. Speaker, I dreamt, Mr. Siaga, someone came to me and said, look in that mirror, Babsy. And I looked in the mirror. I saw nothing. The person said, look again. And when I looked, I saw Mr. Siaga's image. And then I took a second look and I didn't see him. And the person said to me, if you see him or if you don't see him, he will always.
We have a moment of silence we observed prior to the presentation by the minister.
Public business. Let's stand and be quiet in the may his soul public business. Minister McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, let me acknowledge the members of this Honorable House and to acknowledge the supporting team of the Ministry of Local Government, headed by our Permanent Secretary, and to the heads of agencies of the ministry that has contributed to the success of the Ministry of Local Government over the last couple of years. Mr. Speaker, I want to first of all give God thanks for his mercies and his tender care, for guiding and protecting through this period. It is said that with God all things are possible, and the power of the Almighty has manifested itself in many ways. And one of that manifestation, Mr. Speaker, is on a day like today, I have found the energy or as Mr. Siaga would say, the vim, vigor, and vitality to be able to make my presentation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my family, my wife Marcy, and my sons, and the entire extended family for the continued support and encouragement. West Kingston, Mr. Speaker, has become an institution that can never be surpassed. And I want to reach out in a very special way this afternoon to the people of West Kingston. Later on in Tivoli, we will express ourselves in a different format. But I want to use this parliament to say to the people of West Kingston that you continue to be a great constituency, a loyal constituency. You continue to be a source of strength and inspiration, and I value our relationship in such a way that I will always continue to make you proud. Mr. Speaker, I would like to get into the presentation, so I would not go further in the acknowledgements, but everybody know how grateful I am. And I want to, first of all, acknowledge the presence of our councillors and mayors who are here this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today is the 89th birthday of the Most Honorable Edward Philip George Siaga. When I prepared this speech, Mr. Speaker, it was done knowing in my heart that I wanted to refer to him in the present tense, not in the past tense, Mr. Speaker. But what can I say? I want to spend 5 minutes, and I hope, Mr. House Leader, you'll give me back the time in the presentation. Not to make my tribute, but to say that I spent last Thursday and Friday with Mr. Siaga. Over the Easter holidays, I spent 2 days with him. I enjoyed his company then because we spoke on many issues. And one of the things that struck me, Mr. Speaker, was during the conversation, he always focused his attention on what is happening back home. What will happen to the football? What will happen to this? What will happen to that? And I had one point I had to say to him, sir, you gave almost 60 years of your life serving people. Now is the time for you to sit back and try to enjoy life, although it is difficult. But he would never have none of it, Mr. Speaker. I am going to save my tribute, Mr. Speaker, for when this Parliament pays official tribute to the man who has been a source of strength and inspiration. And the song says, if loving you is wrong, then we don't want to be right. And we maintain that loving Edward Philip George Siaga was the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker. I am making this contribution as a proud member of this administration. This administration has made significant steps to bring more Jamaicans into prosperity during the last financial year. We are a young administration, just entering our 4th parliamentary year. And we are led by the most Honorable Prime Minister, a man of youth and also of experience. He is in his 22nd year as a parliamentarian, which is nearly half his age. In him, Mr. Speaker, we have a visionary, a builder of national institutions, and a leader of clear thinking, divisive action, and calm assurance. But let me say, but not youthful exuberance. I am even more proud of the fact that the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development has carried its weight in contributing positively to the Jamaican life. Mr. Speaker, last year has been a phenomenal year for local government. We have recorded some of the most significant achievements in the history of the administration of local government, even as we have been battered with serious issues, Mr. Speaker, serious challenges affecting local government. As a government, we want to publicly express our love and respect for the people of Jamaica who have placed us here to serve them. We are also profoundly grateful to our civil servants in every ministry and agencies of government. My presentation today will address the record of what we have done over the last financial year and what we intend to do this year. I want to commend and encourage local authorities as they continue to manage the development approval process that falls under their responsibility as it relates to the Building Act of 2019. This act, Mr. Speaker, came into effect on January 15th this year. And since that time, Mr. Speaker, all the structures identified in the Act has been established, including the Building Practitioners Board, the Appeal Tribunal, and the Building Advisory Council, have all been fully constituted and are operating, and the regulations to the Act are there to advance the stage of development. In fact, the ministry is partnering, Mr. Speaker, with the Jamaica Social Investment Fund, the World Bank, the Bureau of Standards, in developing and implementing a detailed training program on the building code for local government practitioners. Between April and December in the last financial year, the local authorities and partner agencies processed some 3,925 applications valued at 58.3 billion Jamaican dollars and approved over 3,000 within 90 days, Mr. Speaker, and 88.5% approval rate. The Economic Growth Council, Mr. Speaker, has identified the building approval process as one of the key instruments in the growth agenda for the country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one action that has been taken that will bring the building industry and the building approval process in line is the standardization of building fees. Mr. Speaker, the fees that are charged by the local authorities some time ago was not on a unified front, Mr. Speaker. And a part of the critical benchmark of the International Monetary Fund was for us to streamline the building fees, Mr. Speaker. And I am proud to advise this Honourable House that the building fees have been standardized, so there is not one fee in St. Mary, one in St. Thomas, and one in St. Anne. It is now a standard building fee, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there will be a decrease in some of the rates paid based on the adjustment that has been made. And I intend, Mr. Speaker, at some point in time to bring to this Honourable House the full details of this new game-changing bit of standardizing of the fees, Mr. Speaker, so that the House can fully digest and understand this new dispensation. Mr. Speaker, we continue to allocate dedicated financing to elected representatives through the Municipal Social Assistance Fund to increase their effectiveness at assisting the vulnerable in their division. The funds enhance social protection through administrative support to councillors, social housing assistance, indigent housing assistance, and education and funeral grant. Last year, Mr. Speaker, every division received an allocation of $300,000 for education, grant, back to school, and other educational related services. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce that this year, the education grant for each division will be increased to $500,000 per division. And additionally, Mr. Speaker, the allocation for the administrative assistance will move from $25,000 to $30,000 a month, Mr. Speaker, for each division. We have also started constructing modern concrete houses for indigent people, Mr. Speaker. And those persons who we are assisting are living outside of our infirmary system. We started in Clarendon with the aim of building 28 such houses for 2018-2019. 11 of those were completed. And the remaining portion, Mr. Speaker, in the parishes of St. Anne, St. Thomas, and Trelawney, and St. Thomas, is well advanced. Mr. Speaker, we have built houses in Lime Hall, Beecher Town, Councillor Bell, right. So we build, and I must make the point, Mr. Speaker, that we have not only targeted GLP representatives, Mr. Speaker, but we are doing it right across the board. Because this program, Mr. Speaker, no politics. We are dealing with the poor and destitute of the country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this year we'll be turning our attention to the parishes of St. James, St. Catherine, Portland, and Kingston to improve the living conditions of those who are in need, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have not forgotten the outdoor poor who live in structures, Mr. Speaker, that are in serious stage of disrepair. This year, Mr. Speaker, this caring administration, this considerate administration, this administration of compassion will be introducing in this financial year a special program valued at $20 million designed to implement repair to houses of registered outdoor poor right across the country, Mr. Speaker. We are also continuing to improve the infrastructure of our infirmaries island-wide. Last year I announced a special project involving a comprehensive work on a number of infirmaries to be financed to the tune of $200 million through the National Housing Trust. And I want to say a big thank you to Minister Clark. When he was chairman of the NHT, he was the one that put through the project, Mr. Speaker. While there were delays, Mr. Speaker, the country is aware that recently we signed a memorandum of understanding with the NHT and work have started accordingly. Portland Infirmary will benefit from a new female ward. In St. James, a male ward will be built this year. In Westmoreland, work have started on a new female ward and a matron quarters. And in Manchester, where I broke ground a couple of weeks ago with the mayor, a new female ward will be constructed this year. All works is to be undertaken under the MOU with the NHT and will be completed in 1 year's time, Mr. Speaker. Prosperity on the go, responding to the needs of those who are in state care, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in addition to this construction program, residents will benefit from the deployment for the first time in the history of our infirmaries, Mr. Speaker. The residents will have the benefit of a dietitian and a physiotherapist will be in all our institutions, all our infirmaries, Mr. Speaker. A submission has been made in this regard to the Ministry of Finance for approval, and we are awaiting that approval. Another game-changing, it is going to happen. Don't worry, it will happen. Another game-changing move, Mr. Speaker. We have provided autoclaves, Mr. Speaker, a very important machinery that is needed in our infirmaries to safeguard the health of those who reside in our infirmary. I handed over 12 autoclaves 2 weeks ago, and they are already in use, Mr. Speaker. I want to say thanks to the National Health Fund for providing the $5 million that assist us in obtaining these critical devices as we provide the benefit to our infirmaries, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Social Protection Program is designed to rescue, secure, and enhance the life of our vulnerable people. That is why our efforts are not confined to expanding the built environment at the infirmary. We are rescuing our homeless population, Mr. Speaker, which is on the rise in Jamaica. Currently, it is estimated that there is over 1,971 persons who are living on the streets of the country. It doesn't necessarily mean that the final figure is the correct one, but this is what we have captured in the registration, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we started the program of constructing drop-in centers across the country. St. Anne, St. Mary, these two centers was completed at a cost of $28 million. We officially opened in May and November, respectively, the St. Elizabeth Drop-In Center and the one in Hanover, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to advise this Honorable House that the drop-in centers that are now under construction in St. Thomas and Trelawney are almost completed, Mr. Speaker, and in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be opening an additional 2 drop-in centers that will complete the complement of centers built by this administration since 2016. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to the corporate area. This year, Mr. Speaker, a new shelter for the homeless and vulnerable in the corporate area, something I've started when I was mayor of Kingston, but wasn't able to complete the journey. Now I'm in the right place at the right time to complete the job, Mr. Speaker. This center, Mr. Speaker, will be built at approximately a cost of $120 million, Mr. Speaker. We are in partnership with the Health Fund. We are in partnership with JSIF, Mr. Speaker. When this facility is constructed, Mr. Speaker, it will become a modern drop-in facility, the first of its kind to be built in this part of the world, Mr. Speaker. We are not only providing this physical space for the care of our homeless, Mr. Speaker, but this year, $30 million will be provided to the drop-in centers for nutritional support, Mr. Speaker. So we're not just putting down these facilities and leave them just like that, Mr. Speaker. The administrative structure through which the service to the homeless are provided have been greatly enhanced, as 8 parishes have established homeless committee in the last financial year, Mr. Speaker. The security of our infirmaries is being addressed as never before, never in the history. Hanover has been the forerunner. Closed-circuit television, perimeter fencing and lighting has started in the parish of Hanover. Clarendon is next on the list, Mr. Speaker. We are focusing on enhancing the quality of life for residents at the infirmary. The provision of standby generating plants, Mr. Speaker. When GAPS go out, they don't have to resort to candle and tinning lamp anymore, Mr. Speaker. By the end of this year, all our infirmaries will have generators that have the capacity to run the entire facility, Mr. Speaker, and I am proud to say that this has been achieved with the kind assistance of the National Housing Trust and the support of the Chase Fund, Mr. Speaker. So by the end of this calendar year, Mr. Speaker, we'll have provided all these necessary comfort to the staff and residents of the facility. Mr. Speaker, I want to make mention of the Board of Supervision. This agency is the ministry's guardian of the Social Protection Program and is a beacon of hope for our vulnerable people, Mr. Speaker. I want to publicly use the floor of this Parliament to commend the staff of the board, headed by a young and vibrant Ms. Trika Lewis, as they work to protect our citizens in partnership with the local authorities, Mr. Speaker. And in this regard, I wish to announce that the Golden Age Home in Vineyard Town and the Denham Town Golden Age Home, Mr. Speaker, have been returned to the Ministry of Local Government since February the 5th of this year, and I want to thank the Ministry of Labour and Social Security for what they did over the period that they had this institution under their care, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are getting our young people to appreciate local government, while giving them the incentive and using their energies and talents to help the ministry to undertake critical activities. That is how the Youth Summer Employment Program over the last 3 years, Mr. Speaker, has generated more than 7,500 employment opportunities. Young people from 228 divisions were employed to undertake tasks relevant to the ministry's core function, including streetlight audit, missing street signs, data collection, and the collection on vulnerable communities across the country. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend them. The work that they did on the streetlight audit was critical, Mr. Speaker, to the agreement that was reached between the Jamaica Public Service Company and the government as it relates to the number of functioning streetlights against those that were not functioning, Mr. Speaker. This year, they will help to streamline the system of managing trade license. We intend to increase the number of young people in the program this year to 3,500, Mr. Speaker. So for the Youth Summer Employment Program in the Ministry of Local Government, some 3,500 young people will be able to find employment, Mr. Speaker. I am happy to note that 30% of those who participated in the previous program, Mr. Speaker, are now fully employed in the local government system, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, despite the challenges we face in implementing our market rehabilitation project, last year we did as best as we can because, you know, the funds are limited, but we still persevere. And the member from Southwest Clarendon would be well aware that the work didn't lay the foundation. That is not a foundation. The work on the Falmouth Market, Mr. Speaker. The Falmouth Market was completed in partnership with the Port Authority of Jamaica at a cost of 300 million Jamaican dollars, Mr. Speaker, and the Falmouth Market is up and running, Mr. Speaker. Okay. Having complete phase 1 of the Clarkstown Market, which I will acknowledge, well, lay the foundation, but I am the finisher. Amen. Amen. Phase 2 of the project, which involved the construction of an administrative building, was done last year. The contract has been signed to commence. The work on the administrative building is presently in motion. Last year I signed the contract for the first phase of a new dispensation in market for the Port Maria Market, Mr. Speaker, which will be a model market in the country. And I am pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, that they are on track. And we are hoping that by July, the Port Maria Market will be completed and ready. We have completed the work on the Black River Market, Mr. Speaker. We are presently working on the Papine Market, and then we'll be focusing our attention on the Stone Hill Market, Mr. Speaker. And as I gave a commitment last year, the Hopewell Market, Mr. Speaker, we now have the funds in an MP, and I will be making some announcements shortly on the Hopewell Market, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member from Western Westmoreland will be pleased to hear that following consultations with the Negril Chamber of Commerce, residents and stakeholders in Negril, the technical team of the ministry has completed the design for a brand new market to be built in Negril at a cost of $70 million, and that work will commence later on this year, Mr. Speaker, as soon as we conclude. The mayor knows because he was on the tour. He was on the tour. He was a part of it. He was a part of it. He was a part of it. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the question of potable water, which is an important development standard for which this ministry has responsibility for providing minor water supply. Mr. Speaker, we commence a program of installing water shops in drought-stricken communities. In the last financial year, 2 of these critical facilities were established in Marley Hill and Belfield in Manchester. The Belfield facility will provide 20,000 gallons of purified water every day to the residents of Belfield and the surrounding communities, Mr. Speaker. Water shop is to be built at Southfield and Malvern in St. Elizabeth. Both are approximately 60% complete and are scheduled to be commissioned in service in August. Work will commence shortly on the facility at Myersville and Junction in the parish. And this year, Mr. Speaker, we will be bringing relief to communities in the parishes of St. Mary, Amen. Portland, yes. Through the construction of water shops in these respective parishes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, access to parochial roads is a constant demand from our citizens. Last year, the ministry invested over some $260 million on rehabilitating and repairing flood damage on other parochial roads right across the country. One of the projects that we are proud of, Mr. Speaker, is the transformation of Douglas Castle in St. Ann, a small agricultural district. That community, Mr. Speaker, was affected badly by rains. Yes. People was trapped in the community. Yes. They had to use boat to go from one end of the community to the other, Mr. Speaker. Yes. And this government took a conscious decision that the people of Douglas Castle need a solution to the problem. And we spent over some $40 million, Mr. Speaker, elevating the road, putting in drains and proper infrastructure. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the community of Douglas Castle is thankful for the work of this administration, and we are proud that we were able to bring some relief to the long suffering that the communities have been experiencing. Mr. Speaker, trade license is a significant source of revenues to the local authorities. We have seen improvement in the collection of trade license in the last financial year. The municipal corporation collected some $274.2 million from 11,300 entities that are registered at a compliance rate of 93%. I want to urge the local authorities, Mr. Speaker, use this parliament to say to them that it is important, mayors and councillors, that you step up the drive to increase your own source revenues, because the ministry is on a mission to do things with the limited resources, but you will have to play your part to advance your standing when it comes on to service delivery. Mr. Speaker, a critical service supported by property taxes is streetlight. Yes. Under this administration, the long-standing massive weight of streetlight debt to the Jamaica Public Service Company has been lifted from the shoulders of the local authorities. Mr. Speaker, a debt which we inherited, which ran into billions of dollars, at one stage reaching over $7 billion, Mr. Speaker.
Who was the minister? Negligent.
Mr. Speaker,
negligent.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance, after discussions and begging and pleading the Minister of Finance said, listen, I'm going to do something. And Mr. Speaker, you know what it come like, Mr. Speaker? You know what it come like, Mr. Speaker? It come as if Emancipation Day has come 3 months early for the local authorities, because this massive debt, Mr. Speaker, this massive debt, Mr. Speaker, and I want to say publicly to the Minister of Finance, want to thank him for the support that he has given us for a clean slate. And Mr. Speaker, we are putting in the mechanism to monitor and to ensure that taxpayers are getting what they are paying for from the Jamaica Public Service Company. The member from East Kingston posed some questions last week, and I promised to respond, but time will not permit. But just to say, I will provide those answers to the questions that you asked. But to give a quick update on the state of streetlights. Some 43,687 of the overall target of 105,000 lights have been installed since its inception in 2017-2018 financial year. In the last financial year, 7,127 LED lights were installed. For this calendar year, the installation target is set at 25,000 streetlights, Mr. Speaker. And they are going to be moving to certain towns in some parishes, and I want to just name quickly: Morant Bay, Port Maria, Port Antonio, Maypen, Mandeville, Black River, and Lucy will be the recipient of the next round of streetlight repair, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn now to the Jamaica Fire Brigade, which continue to protect the lives and properties across the country. I want to salute the staff of the brigade and recognize the new commissioner, Mr. Stuart Beckford, and also to thank the previous commissioner, Mr. Raymond Spence, for his many years of service to the Jamaica Fire Brigade. Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, I will be addressing the graduation ceremony of a new set of recruits, 110, that will complement the fighting capabilities of the Jamaica Fire Brigade. Not only are we graduating more, Mr. Speaker, but we are providing more resources. Never in the history of the Jamaica Fire Brigade that they have gotten 500 bunker gear one time, Mr. Speaker. It has never happened before. Never before, Mr. Speaker. In the last financial year, Mr. Speaker, breathing apparatus again, which was bought, you will give them 20 this month, and 20 the next month. Gone are those days. We buy in bulk, Mr. Speaker, and we have spent $167 million, Mr. Speaker, in providing that each firefighter has his or her own personal gears, Mr. Speaker. In the last financial year, we built a brand new fire station in Montego Bay. We renovated the one in Kingston. We put in fire boats. Mr. Speaker, I had a discussion with a member of the brigade, and you know what he said to me? That he's in the brigade for over 20 years. And in the time that he has been in the brigade, he has never witnessed this before. For the first time in decades, Mr. Speaker. We are building 5 brand new fire stations. Never before, Mr. Speaker. Never before.
One in Port Maria.
We're not only building the stations, we are carrying out comprehensive repairs. The repair that was started under the member from Southwest at Spanish Town is in the final phase. We are spending, and I want you to listen to this, we're spending 53.7 million on the Frankfield Fire Station. Yes. We're spending $10 million on the Falmouth Fire Station. Yes. And we're spending, Mr. Speaker, an additional $10 million thanks to the Tourism Enhancement Fund to provide work to upgrade the Negril Fire Station, Mr. Speaker. Prosperity is all over, Mr. Speaker. All over, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after many challenges, I can now stand and say without fear of contradiction that the Barnett Street Fire Station construction will commence. We will now break ground on the 6th for the construction of the facility. But I want to make the point that the reason why these 3 stations have taken so long is that we are dealing with international funding from the World Bank. And there are certain procedures that has to be adhered to. So, Mr. Speaker, finally, the people in Western Jamaica will have a brand new fire station, Mr. Speaker. We are providing all the necessary resources to equip our firefighters, Mr. Speaker, and I am sure that at the end of the day, the country will be better off, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management continue to do us proud. This critical agency, Mr. Speaker, is critical in our fight as we prepare ourselves as a country that is prone to natural disaster. I led the Jamaican delegation recently to the concluded Global Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction in Geneva, in Switzerland, Mr. Speaker. Last year, ADPEM developed, after consultations with the stakeholders, an integrated disaster risk management and planning system was put in place, working in consultation with the local authorities, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government is moving in the right direction to secure the country's future in case we are affected by a disaster. The Minister of Finance spoke about the funding that is to be provided to assist.
Minister, the member
Mr.
time
Speaker,
for
I ask that the member's
speaking.
time be extended sufficient to enable him to complete his presentation.
Yeah? How much money we spend on this?
Those in favor?
We see that.
Those against? As of it. Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we continue, Mr. Speaker, to provide the leadership, and I want to thank the staff at ADPEM. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to advise this Honourable House that Jamaica will host next year in Montego Bay the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk in the Americas and the Caribbean. I want to thank the colleagues in the Caribbean and other countries that advocated and asked Jamaica to host this global platform. Our Minister of Finance will participate in the launch of the website in a couple of weeks' time. And at a further date, Mr. Speaker, I will update this Honourable House on the progress of the conference. But just to say, the hurricane season commences in a couple of days' time. I want to urge our our parliamentarians and elected representatives to tap into the resources of ADPEM. Seek information. Do not allow disaster to come and you're not in a position to respond to the challenges. I'm throwing that out. Mr. Speaker, the Social Development Commission continue to provide quality support, Mr. Speaker. This entity in the last financial year was able to provide some 2,415 jobs. Majority of these, Mr. Speaker, being full-time jobs, Mr. Speaker. They continue to work efficiently and effectively on various community programs across the country, Mr. Speaker. I must say that I am proud of the achievements of the Social Development Commission in all areas. I want to commend them and thank them for the work that they have been doing. The parish development committees have been reactivated. Last year, November, the relaunch of this was done in Montego Bay. The SDC has now full control of the parish development committees, which will be funded by the government. But there are conditions under which these funds can be drawn down, Mr. Speaker, and I am quite sure, Mr. Speaker, that we have no difficulty in achieving those goals, Mr. Speaker. In coming down, Mr. Speaker, they say you save the best wine for the last, Mr. Speaker. Yes. The National Solid Waste Management Authority, Mr. Speaker, continue to be a positive example of government in action. The agency continues to practice sound corporate governance with all the outstanding audited financial statements and annual reports having been updated, Mr. Speaker, never in the history of the National Solid Waste Management Authority. You are coming to that. You don't worry. The National Solid Waste Management Authority is on track, Mr. Speaker, to submit the 2018-2019 audited statement and the corresponding annual report within time as required by the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. Mr. Speaker, the agency is almost 70% compliant with the current statutory requirement on life insurance, and nearly 80% of all disposal sites, the workers, sidemen, drivers, has been fully vaccinated. Mr. Speaker, I am happy to announce last year we provided an increase in the salary for the sidemen and the drivers and those who sweep, Mr. Speaker. I am proud to announce that this year again, Mr. Speaker, we are providing another 28% salary increase effective as of the 1st of July, Mr. Speaker. With this regard, Mr. Speaker, the core, we're looking at that also, the core responsibility of the entity. The entity collected nearly 700,000 tons of solid waste, over 70% of the total solid waste generated island-wide. In adherence to the collection schedule, I know that many of you are asking how you don't see the garbage trucks, how you don't see it on the MPRs. They have been working. They are cleaning the towns. Yes, they're cleaning the towns. 80% compliance with the sweeping schedule.
Yes.
And minor roads and towns, 90%. There is a reason for this improvement of the performance of the entity, Mr. Speaker, because we have put more trucks on the roads.
Yes.
We have repaired those trucks that are down, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
For the first time since the entity has been established, they used to get 3 trucks this year, 2 the next year, and in the last 5 years of that administration, collectively you never give them 10 trucks. Between 2016 and today, we have provided 43 brand new trucks to the National Solid Waste Management Authority. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced, and so too is the Minister of Finance, that we are now far advanced in putting into the system an unprecedented 100 units in this financial year. And when that is done, Mr. Speaker, it will bring the total number of trucks that have been brought into the system by this administration since 2016 to 143 trucks, Mr. Speaker. We are working for the citizens, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, through partnership with the Tourism Enhancement Fund, the agency, Mr. Speaker, has gotten 2 pickup trucks, Mr. Speaker. We continue to deal with the regulations governing the operations of the entity, Mr. Speaker. We are making changes, Mr. Speaker, to improve the quality of service offered by the National Solid Waste Management Authority. There is one aspect, Mr. Speaker, that is of concern, and that is the question of the fires that we have had at Riverton, at Retirement, and in St. Thomas. Again, Mr. Speaker, I want to use the Parliament to extend apologies to the many Jamaicans who have suffered discomfort because of these fires. Mr. Speaker, we are cognizant of these problems, and we are working, Mr. Speaker. In a couple of weeks' time, I'll be able to make an announcement as to how we are going to be dealing with the issue, especially at Retirement. We have found a location to relocate the dump in St. Thomas. When these details, Mr. Speaker, would have been concluded, I will make the necessary announcement, Mr. Speaker. We hear the call and we are responding to the concerns of the Jamaican people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to show you the effectiveness of the National Solid Waste Management Authority, and the Chairman Dennis Strong is here along with the board members, and I want to applaud them and thank them for the many long hours of service that they have been giving, that they are giving, Mr. Speaker. I have emphasized the importance of own source revenue. It is critical in financing the affairs of the entity, Mr. Speaker. Last year, they set a target of $407 million for own source revenue. And I am pleased, Mr. Speaker, to announce that under good management, stable hands, management that don't look at parties, the leadership, they exceeded the target. Instead of collecting $407 million, they collected $469 million, Mr. Speaker, $62 million more. And they continue, Mr. Speaker. They continue, Mr. Speaker, to be a beacon of hope. And I want to say without fear of contradiction, 3 years ago when you talk about the National Solid Waste Management Authority, people say so them. So what them do now? This year when you talk about solid waste, they have credibility. Yes. People believe in them. And we have only been able to achieve that, Mr. Speaker, by maintaining a strong discipline of leadership. And I want to commend and thank the board for sticking to what they have maintained, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in concluding this presentation, on a day that I mourn the passing of a father, a friend, a man who inspired me all my life, Mr. Speaker. Somebody who was not afraid to pull me by the waist and chastise me, Mr. Speaker. I am not ashamed to speak. I am now seeing the value of that discipline that Edward Seaga instilled in me, Mr. Speaker, over those years. And I am standing here with my heart shattered, but the courage, the last couple of hours that I spent with him on Friday, when I saw him, I said to myself, Desmond, be strong, because he wants you to be strong. Mr. Speaker, he gave me the opportunity as a little boy. When I spoke at his wedding reception at Vale Royal in 1965, when he got married, I gave the toast at that wedding at Vale Royal. And I remember the first time in my life I put on a suit. The wedding was at 5 o'clock at Kingston Parish Church, and they took me down to El Cartle, Ingles and Harbour Street. A lot of you don't know it. And I bought a blue suit. The late Carter Brown took me to buy the suit. I don't know how she get the money. The shoes that I was wearing, yes, they're the color green. No, we used to wear orange because orange was the original color. Tangerine, yes, the original West Kingston color. And Mr. Speaker, the shoes that I wore to the wedding was burning me, but I couldn't say so. I went to the wedding. And I gave my toast on behalf of the people of West Kingston in 1965. He gave me the opportunity. I remember he used to take me across the country. And when we go to public meetings, he used to talk for 10 minutes. And then he says, you know, when you're going out in your motor car, you have a spare tire. And he say, every motor car have a spare tire. And I want now to give you my spare tire. And I was able to go talk to the audience. And this is from a tender age. Tender age. I was about 9, 10 at that time. About 9, 10. Yes, in my life, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, in 1977, when he gave me the opportunity to succeed the Speaker of the House, who was the councillor then for Denham Town. And when, Mr. Speaker, I said to him, I don't know how to be a councillor, he said to me, bear the name, I'll do the work. Bear the name, I'll do the work. But let me tell you something. It wasn't an easy name to bear because you had to do the work. And so I am here today as the Minister of Local Government. On Easter Sunday, when I was with him, my wife Marcia was there and my son Marcus. He said to me, Desmond, I am proud of you. I am proud of what you have been able to accomplish. And he said to me, I am more proud, equally proud, in the manner in which you stood up beside Andrew in the struggle. He said those words to me in the presence of my wife, Annette Bartlett. And I said to him, sir, I am proud of you because you gave me this opportunity. Not many people in West Kingston ever dreamt of walking with, I remember going to the White House. When he visited the White House, I went as a little boy to the reception. Well, I was big in 1980, but I was able to go into the Rose Garden. So these opportunities, these opportunities, and not many of us will ever get those opportunities again. It comes in a once in a lifetime. And today, my contribution in this sectoral debate, I am dedicating this to the most Honorable Edward Philip George Seaga. Mr. Speaker, my passion as a local government practitioner is the development of the people and their community. No other form of government can respond to the people's needs like local government.
That's right.
If there's a fire at midnight, the councillors is the first line of response.
Yes.
If funeral or schooling or any other needs arise, Mr. Speaker, the councillors are the first line of response. Local government is here to stay, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
And I will do everything in my powers to improve people's lives right across the 228 divisions of the municipality of Jamaica. That is why we are implementing institutional change through innovative and major capital investment. We are not just doing things better, we are doing them differently. That is why the lives of the people in Clarendon, Manchester, and St. Elizabeth are being transformed through water shops, with more to come in other drought-stricken communities. That is why the new CCTV system and autoclave and more male and female wards, the residents and staff in our infirmaries are experiencing an enhanced quality of life. That is why we are making credible inroads in repairing and rehabilitating parochial roads. That is why our markets are being expanded and transformed to become critical business community and develop spatial order hubs for our towns and cities. That is why, for the first time, the National Solid Waste Management Authority will have 143 brand new garbage trucks in the field working for our people. That is why the Social Municipal Protection Assistance Program has been created to give our councillors and municipal corporation the financial muscle, Mr. Speaker. Over 42,000 Jamaicans have benefited from this program since it began 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker. That is why the Youth Summer Employment Program, now in its third year, will interface with over 10,000 young people. It has given them a taste of working life, a taste of local government, and it is the flame that lit the hope for their prosperity and future here in Jamaica. Local government is working with central government in changing the psyche of our people. As this administration takes on social and economic challenges through hard work and innovation, as we perform the people's will, I salute all employees of the ministry and its portfolio entity. They deserve the encouragement as they respond to the human needs. That is why, finally, we are introducing this year a local government educational scholarship to provide financial assistance of education of employees of the Ministry of Local Government and its portfolio entity. 6 scholarships valued at $2.1 million will be awarded every year to selected participants who will pursue an area of study that is in keeping with the portfolio of the ministry. The focus here, Mr. Speaker, is strengthening urban planning and technical service capacity of the ministry and its portfolio agencies. I close my presentation as I began, as a proud member of a government that is demonstrating its commitment to helping our people prosper. In the face of challenges, frustration, and great odds, we persevere. I'm inspired by the simple words of former British Prime Minister, the late Sir Winston Churchill: never, 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 never give up. We are on a journey to prosperity, humbled by the increasing faith of our people. When it seems as if the soil of hope is cemented over by challenges, we look to the north, the south, and the west, and most recently to the east, and realize that the green grass is breaking through. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Inspiring, sir.
God bless you, brother.
Mr. Speaker, that has been a wonderful presentation. And it illustrates the degree to which Desmond has been a very good student, because he has exhibited a sense of courage today in the face of all the challenges that he's confronted with. He did one of the finest jobs he has done in this honorable House. I am struck, Mr. Speaker, by something he said. He said opportunities at times come once in a lifetime. I want to indicate to him that being able to speak 15 minutes beyond the time is one such opportunity, once in a lifetime. So, Mr. Speaker, I now invite you to ask the member from Southeast St. Andrew to make his presentation.
Mr. Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, members, before I go into my presentation, I too would like to extend, on behalf of the People's National Party, our condolences to the family, the friends, the colleagues, and there are a number of colleagues here who worked closely with Mr. Seaga and spent a significant part of their political life with him. The opposition will give its tribute when Parliament convenes for a special sitting. Mr. Speaker, I start my presentation by giving thanks to the Almighty for continuing to bless me with health and strength to carry out my responsibilities in this House. I am forever grateful to my constituents from Southeast St. Andrew who have sent me here to represent their interests. I will continue to do so with integrity and a sense of accountability. The constituency has a dedicated team of workers, led by our councillors, Andrew Swaby, who is here, Kari Douglas, our Secretary Ivy Hill, Organizer Sonia Forbes, and a host of others, many of whom are here, who give yeoman service behind the scenes and in most cases unrecognized, as do so many of the political workers across the political divide. I want to thank our party president and opposition leader, Dr. Peter Phillips, for his continued guidance and support, and to my colleagues both here in the House and in the party for their support. And finally, Mr. Speaker, and by no means least, I want to thank my family for always supporting me in everything that I do. Mr. Speaker, I intend to spend a couple of minutes providing an update on an initiative I launched last year to increase participation in our democratic process at the constituency level. In collaboration with the Slash Roots Foundation, I launched a website and an app named tellyourmp.com.jm as a way of getting more of my constituents to make recommendations about the types of projects they wish to see implemented in the constituency. The Tell Your MP augments the role of the CDF consultation meetings that we have and allow a broader participation from citizens who may not come to these meetings but who have ideas that they want to share. It improves both the quantity and quality of the constituents' participation in the CDF process, and it develops a toolkit for improving citizens' participation using digital channels such as the app and the website. Mr. Speaker, we launched this project last year, and we had a total of 48 ideas which came from community-based organizations. We were able to narrow that down and shortlist 10 community development proposals and 7 youth innovation proposals. And we have begun the phase of allowing those residents to vote, and that started notification to promote positive and proper garbage disposal, community infrastructure, installing security cameras in one section of Vineyard Town, that has been a proposal, and building apps and systems to create employment opportunities for young persons within the constituency. So, Speaker, let me now move to the substantive part of my presentation. There are 6 areas that I intend to cover today. First is the state of the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. Secondly, I intend to talk about how we can incentivize innovations in science and technology. Third, I'm going to speak about the future of the Universal Service Fund. Fourth, how we can best utilize our limited resources for our tech entrepreneurs. Fifth, I'm going to speak about our cybersecurity arrangements. And finally, about how we can at MSET as a lost year. A lost year. And I'm going to give the examples of the initiatives that we have lost 1 year on. I start with the Data Protection Bill, Mr. Speaker. This was placed before a Joint Select Committee in November 2017. It had a number of meetings and received submissions from stakeholders. The last meeting of that committee was held on March 27, 2018. That's almost 1 year and 3 months ago. Now, why is data protection important? Apart from it being a critical prerequisite for the NIDS, the Data Protection Bill defines how we store data, how we manage data, who has the right to that data, and it is an important piece of legislation for investors who are looking to come into our country as well as protecting our citizens. Mr. Speaker, I know the new minister has indicated that she intends to resume the sittings of the Joint Select Committee, but we have lost over 1 year on the Data Protection Bill. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the then government established the Office of the Chief Information Officer. And the reason we established that is because there were a plethora of ICT projects across ministries, agencies, and departments. We operate, and to a great extent we still do, in a fairly siloed manner. the CIO's office was intended to streamline all of those initiatives to ensure that we were not duplicating effort, that we were not wasting resources. The last holder of that office, Dr. Louis Shalal, demitted office last year. Prior to him demitting office, he was working on a part-time basis. Mr. Speaker, we have had no on the status of that critical office. Neither have we had an update on who will replace Dr. Shalal. Mr. Speaker, this is an example of another lost project and a lost year in this ministry. Mr. Speaker, let me talk a little bit about open data. And open data is where government data that is held and used in many ways is put on a platform to make it available to individuals and, most importantly, to entrepreneurs who can use the data and provide economic value for it. The Open Data Barometer, which is produced every 2 years by the World Wide Web Foundation, ranks governments in 3 categories: readiness, implementation, and impact. In the 4th edition of the barometer, published in May 2017, Jamaica was ranked number 1 in the Caribbean and 40 out of 115 countries. And Mr. Speaker, and I don't think anybody can contradict, we were there because of the work that was done in our administration leading up to 2016. Since then, Mr. Speaker, the government's open data program has been at a standstill. We have an open data portal, which was launched in late 2015, which has become almost useless because the data has not been updated. An open data policy has been in draft state for the past 3 years. We have ceded leadership in this domain to other countries in the region, notably St. Lucia, which became the first Caribbean country to have an open data policy that embraces what we call the open by default principle. And we continue to ignore the value opportunity that open data can bring. A UWI study, and the member from West Central St. Catherine in his presentation would have known about this, showed that open data can contribute billions of dollars to the Jamaican economy through education, tourism, and agriculture. Mr. Speaker, we can't keep marking time and paying lip service to these critical areas of government. It has enormous potential to increase the efficiency of the public service and to stimulate innovation and entrepreneurship. Mr. Speaker, we have lost 1 year on this. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the Cybercrimes Act. When the Cybercrimes Act was passed, into the Act was a mandatory review of the Act on the 3rd anniversary of its passing. The last set of amendments were made to the Act in December 2015. The review of the Act should have commenced December last year, over 6 months ago. You might ask, why is this important, Mr. Speaker? It is important because the fast changing nature of technology requires us as legislators to ensure that our legislation keeps up with it. Cybercrimes was estimated in 2017 to cost the country of Jamaica over $100 million US. We need, as a parliament, to give our security forces and our prosecutors the tools to do their jobs. Mr. Speaker, when I listened to the minister's presentation, there was not even a mention of cybercrimes as a critical piece of legislation to be placed on the priority of being dealt with. Mr. Speaker, we have lost time, critical time, in dealing with this. Mr. Speaker, when the former Minister Andrew Wheatley resigned from the portfolio in July of 2018, we urged the Prime Minister to appoint someone who had the time and the focus to drive the developments in the ministry. The Prime Minister decided to personally hold the ministry for a period of almost 7 to 8 months. And many critical initiatives in the ministry were virtually at a standstill. Mr. Speaker, the country is paying the price of a night watchman who went to the crease and made no runs. Mr. Speaker, I want to urge the Prime Minister not to make the same mistake twice. The Prime Minister is currently of Education. I want to urge him to appoint a full-time minister to that critical ministry so the work of educating our children can be given the focus that it deserves. We have seen with MSET where it is simply not possible for the Prime Minister to devote the kind of time to the ministry. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to how can we incentivize innovations in science and technology. In general, science and technology need to be seen as sources of solution to problems, both present and in the future. In order to improve the economic impact of innovation and how science is studied and taught, government should publicly set the priorities for the science agenda by providing grant funds to solve the country's most important problems. One way to do this is to frame and prioritize the problems and disburse grant funds to propose solutions on a competitive basis. The winners of such funding would be required to disclose their findings in the form of publications or other public presentations at the end of a study. The problems to be addressed would be presented by the government in real terms. A body would be responsible for framing the call for proposals in ways that the scientific and engineering communities would be able to respond with research proposals. It would be clear, Mr. Speaker, that the solutions that would be developed and produced are not going to be overnight solutions, because that's the nature of research. Successfully funded research proposals would produce work that attempts to solve problems. Successful research produces either new knowledge in the area of, in the case of science, and or new tools in the case of engineering that move us forward to the solution. So the problems should be basic ones whose solutions align with a long-term vision for a country. Such an organized approach to stimulating scientific activity also improves the opportunities for local researchers to be able to access larger pools of internationally available funds, either through match funding schemes or through the improved track record of our local scientists and engineers. So, Mr. Speaker, what we're basically saying is government, through collaboration, should determine what are the big issues affecting our country, put aside a pool of funds, invite scientists to bid. They would present their proposals. There would be a body that would evaluate and assess those proposals, and they would provide the funding to those individuals or groupings from the proposal that they send. Mr. Speaker, some of the examples of problems that would be applicable in this area. The problems of coastline erosion and sea level rise, which provide problems for our residents and our industries. Anybody who has been to Hellshire in the last year versus 15 years ago would know the impact that has, for example. How can we prepare for it? What are the new policies needed to guide future real estate development? Another example would be how can we increase the yield in agricultural food production? How can we improve our resistance to diseases? Are there ways to mitigate against the inevitable agricultural losses after large storms? So, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of problems that we can fashion and, with our limited resources, focus them on our local R&D community to solve. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to the Universal Service Fund and how we can plot a future for the Universal Service Fund. Mr. Speaker, if you look in the chart that is displayed there, and I've done the chart over 4 fiscal years. In 2015-16, the revenues from the access fees, and I think most members know how the Universal Service Fund is funded, as a tax on cars that come into the country. It was created by the member from East Kingston and Port Royal. In 2015-16, we accrued $1.5 billion from the access fees. In 2016-17, it went down to 1.3. In 2017-18, 972 million. And then for the last fiscal year, 675 million. Mr. Speaker, over a 4-year period, we have had a fall of over 57%. The main reason for this, Mr. Speaker, is that the advances in technology, and I think every individual in here can relate to this. Last, have you picked up your phone and dialed a relative abroad? The member from Northeast Manchester. Use WhatsApp, right? You learned how to use WhatsApp. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that more and more, the member from Northwest St. Catherine, who is the founder of the articulate minority, can best tell us. But Mr. Speaker, seriously, you brought cell phones to the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, the advances in technology are forcing or encouraging more and more of us to use tools like WhatsApp calling. It means that the revenues coming into the Universal Service Fund continue to decline. And at the current rate, we may not have a Universal Service Fund in another 5 years if the current trajectory continues. There are other sources. There are foreign exchange gains. There are interest income. But the core revenue from the Universal Service Fund is at threat. Mr. Speaker, we are calling for Prime Minister the urgent establishment of a task force to examine the future of the Universal Service Fund and to present answers to some pertinent questions that must be answered. One, what has been the impact of the Universal Service Fund as against the objectives for which it was created? Two, in what ways have the ICT needs of the population changed over the last 14 years? And is the USF the best vehicle through which these needs should be met? Third, does the focus of the USF need to change in order to reflect the current and future needs of the nation's underserved communities? Four, given the current income trajectory of the fund, what are the revenue projections for the next 5 years? And finally, what are the possible alternatives for revenue generation available to continue the viability of the fund? Mr. Speaker, the end result we are trying to arrive at is simple. We need to make an informed determination around whether the purpose for which USF was initially created has been met. If it has been, then we need to ask ourselves whether the USF needs to exist in its current form or any at all, given that it is now operating on deficit financing because it is spending more than it is earning, and in the very near future, its revenues are going to dry up. Mr. Speaker, I would commend to the Prime Minister, he put together a task force for Petrojam. I think there should be collaboration with the opposition, identify sector partners. Let us do this urgently. It's not a political issue. The same issue would exist whether we were here or there, and I believe it requires urgency if we are to deal with that. Okay. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to how we can provide resources to support our tech entrepreneurs. The minister in our presentation indicated that $200 million would be allocated this fiscal year to support the work of tech entrepreneurs. We support the broad thrust of providing funding support for this group, and we want to offer our recommendations as to what we believe the best way to spend the limited resources are. We believe the best utilization of the funds is to support entrepreneurs who are enrolled in an incubator or accelerator where there is structured support, guidance, and mentorship. The facility doesn't need to be owned or managed by the government, but the entrepreneur would need to apply for entry into the facility and would be selected on a competitive basis based on the solution they have developed and their willingness to be coached and to operate within that environment. There'll be very specific timelines and milestones that would be developed for each entrepreneur, which would differ. It wouldn't be a one-size-that-fits-all. And they would have exposure to mentors who would advise them on how they should build and develop their businesses. The objective would be to get the entrepreneur to the stage of developing a prototype that could be pitched to angel investors or venture capitalists, which would then provide an exit for this entity. Mr. Speaker, the disbursements to the entrepreneurs would be done on the achievement of their very specific milestones. So I want to commend to the minister, and again, we have some experience in government where we implemented a similar thing. There was a learning experience. We are willing to sit with the government and share the lessons learned, but we believe and insist that it has to be a structured environment in which the funds are provided. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to what I would term the secrecy around our cybersecurity arrangements. In his last sectoral debate presentation on May 15, 2018, the then Minister of Science, Energy and Technology, Andrew Wheatley, indicated in this House that the government of Jamaica was on the verge of signing an MOU with an Israeli company, Israeli Aerospace Industries, for the establishment of a regional cyber academy. The minister then said that he would be bringing to Cabinet the following week a submission to seek funding for this entity. Mr. Speaker, in November 2018, I tabled questions to the Prime Minister on this matter, and the Prime Minister indicated that no MOU had been signed and that no academy had been established. I further asked the Prime Minister if the government had entered into any agreement or relationship with the Israeli government or an Israeli private sector firm in the area of cybersecurity. The Prime Minister stood up where he was and said that he would not answer that question. Mr. Speaker, we have concerns surrounding the secrecy of the arrangements with the Israelis and the total lack of information around these cybersecurity arrangements. The concern based on the following, Mr. Speaker. One, there is a catalog of a history of corruption that has followed Israeli companies who have provided cybersecurity tools to countries across the world. And I can share the information with you. Secondly, the misuse of these tools to spy on opponents, the media, and human rights activists. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to quote from a New York Times article on August 31st, 2018. And the article is entitled, "Hacking a Prince, an Emperor, and a Journalist Impressed." And I'm quoting, "As private companies develop and sell cutting-edge surveillance technology to governments for tens of millions of dollars, human rights groups say the scant oversight over the practice invites rampant misuse. And no company is more central to the battle than the NSO Group, one of the best-known creators of the spyware that invades smartphones. 2 lawsuits filed in Israel and Cyprus were brought by a Qatari citizen and by Mexican journalists and activists who were all targeted by the company's spyware. In Mexico, the NSO Group has sold the surveillance technology to the Mexican government on the explicit condition that it be used only against criminals and terrorists. Yet some of the country's most prominent human rights lawyers, journalists, and anti-corruption activists have been targeted instead. Many are now plaintiffs in lawsuits. The government of Panama also purchased the spyware, and the president at the time used it to spy on his political rivals and critics, according to court documents in a case here. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to the Financial Times, an article of May 13, 2019. The title of the article is "WhatsApp Voice Calls Used to Inject Israeli Spyware on Phones." This attack has all the hallmarks of a private company known to work with governments to deliver spyware that reportedly takes over the functions of mobile phones operating systems. We have briefed a number of human rights organizations to share the information we can and to work with them to notify civil society. The Israeli Ministry, Mr. Speaker, I know the argument is going to be that we can't discuss it because criminals will know. I am not asking the government to provide operational details, Mr. Speaker, but I believe we are all entitled to an assurance that the tools that are available to the government are not going to be misused or used in a way that different from its original intent. Mr. Speaker, these arrangements require openness and transparency. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the government if the Jamaican government is a partner or collaborates with the Caribbean Israeli Center for Cyber Defense. This is a center which has as its purpose to provide cyber defense solutions for the Caribbean and to develop the capacity of information technology professions in law enforcement, etc. Mr. Speaker, it's important to know whether we are part of that initiative and the extent of our involvement. Mr. Speaker, let me now finally turn to the area of digital literacy. In her contribution, the Minister made several references to the need to a knowledge-based and digital society that sees our people well educated and using their knowledge to drive innovation, entrepreneurship, and to enhance the quality of life. Mr. Speaker, we concur on this objective. The GSMA report entitled Connected Societies, Digital Inclusion in Latin America and the Caribbean identifies the lack of digital literacy and skills as one of the biggest barriers to digital inclusion in the Caribbean. With digital rapidly becoming the dominant mode of interaction for commercial, social, and economic activity, digital the ability to collect, organize, manage, evaluate, and apply data to various business scenarios and activities is rapidly becoming an essential in demand employability skills. Digital literacy and data skills are no longer a privilege, but have become a universal right for all Jamaican youth. Mr. Speaker, having digital skills and the ability to copy and move a file, send in emails, create electronic presentations should become the norm for our students from primary schools coming into high schools. But it goes beyond that. The ability to work with, analyze, and manage data, information, and digital content, interacting, communicating, and collaborating online using digital technologies, creating and editing digital content in different forms, and the capacity, and most importantly, the capacity for critical thinking and problem solving creatively using digital technologies. Mr. Speaker, we have to be prepared as a country to think and to act big about this challenge.
Mr. Samuel.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the member's time be extended in order to enable him to complete his presentation.
Those in favor? Those against? Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. Mr. Speaker, as a country, we have to be prepared to think and act big in dealing with this challenge because it speaks to the future of our youth and our future competitiveness as an economy and a society. We have to exercise policy and strategic leadership in this critical area and mobilize key public sector agencies like the Ministry of Education and Health, private sector interests, and multilateral agencies around a coherent vision about how we adequately prepare our future citizens for the knowledge-based and digital society. As we contemplate the future of the Universal Service Fund amidst the decline in revenues, its mission and program priorities have to be reshaped and reoriented around the challenge of building digital human capital rather than just building infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, in concluding, I have shown how all of us, and I have done it through a pilot which, after we have completed the pilot, I believe it is a tool that all members in here can utilize, how we can deepen and broaden our interaction with our constituents and get them more involved in the development of projects and initiatives. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology has suffered, I don't know if it's called, just a number of the critical initiatives have just been at a standstill. We now have a new minister, but we have lost a year in many of the critical issues. We have to move urgently to protect and define how we move forward with our Universal Service Fund as our revenues continue to decline. We have provided some recommendations on how we believe the resources available to our tech entrepreneurs should be used. We continue to insist on transparency and openness around our cybersecurity arrangements And we believe that as we move forward in the 21st century, digital literacy skills are a critical component that we must all adopt. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Thank you, members.
Mr. Speaker, I now invite you to request that the member from Central Kingston be allowed to take the resolution at number 5, standing in his name.
Mr. Treat.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. On the 28th of September, 2016, more than 2.5 years ago, Mr. Speaker, I moved a motion in this Honorable House, in number 5, on the private member's motion order paper. And I'm grateful to the House Leader for providing the time, albeit 30 months later, for me to introduce this motion. And I trust that similar indulgence will be made available, not only to me, but to other members, so that the full participation of the House on these matters can be entertained. The purpose of my tabling these motions is to promote discussion on important national issues, which do not always or often feature on our agenda as we do particular business or sectional matters. The text of this motion, Mr. Speaker, reads, whereas the development of the agricultural sector is hampered by constraining restrictions, limited availability and high price of capital, and whereas agriculture is the most optimistic growth sector of the Jamaican economy at present, and whereas there are insufficient opportunities for acculturation and training towards a profitable agricultural sector, be it resolved that this Honourable House debate and determine policies which A, will enhance training and expertise in agriculture and agro-processing skills, and B, increase the access of credit to agriculture in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, may I remind honourable members that agriculture provides 7% of our gross domestic product, and when we link it with the agro-processing sector, part of the manufacturing sector, the proportion increases to about 15%. May I remind us also that after periods of impressive growth during the last year, we had only 4% growth in agriculture, and regretfully, for reasons that we are familiar with, the growth has been flat during the first quarter of this year, and because of drought and other conditions, it's likely to not achieve even the modest growth of 5%, which the budget anticipated. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about a sector which provides somewhere in the region of 200,000 jobs at this time, which provides the bulk of our export earnings. The bulk of our export earnings are related to agricultural production. And very, very importantly, because so subsumed in the issue of national security, a vibrant agricultural sector ensures the strength of rural economy, and for that reason plays a very, very significant role in preventing urban blight, preventing the recruitment into gangs, and offers the possibility of sustainable employment for our young people. In the resolution, I indicate agriculture as the most optimistic growth sector of the Jamaican economy. Many will say, but what about tourism? You know, Mr. Speaker, when I look at the figures of retention of earnings in tourism, we always hear about the gross figure, but we seldom hear about the net figure. The net figure is probably south of 30% of our gross earnings. And the only way that we are realistically going to get that to increase so that we have more net earnings of foreign exchange from the tourism industry is by the stimulation of agriculture and the provision of agricultural products to the tourist industry. It's well established. There's no controversy about this. It is the activity and the achievement has not matched the aim that is involved. Mr. Speaker, let us look then at our young people particularly and some of the constraints that seem to betake them in respect of careers in agriculture. You know, Mr. Speaker, some years ago, I went to the Sydney Pagan Agricultural School in St. Elizabeth, and the student body was at the time appeared demotivated. These are people who were being given full board and full education free. And I asked leaders of the student body what we could do to make their offering more attractive. And the first thing they said to me was that Braes River, where the school is, was too far from Santa Cruz and that they were having a problem getting their hair and their nails done. So we suggested, yes, they were complaining that they wanted more opportunity and easier time to have their cosmetology needs taken care of. These are agricultural students. Now, I don't wish to berate them, but I have to describe an attitude that all of us better take into account. So we signed, we could add cosmetology to the curriculum, eh? It's a useful skill. And then the second suggestion, Mr. Speaker, was that the students found it difficult to wake up in the morning, and could they have the agricultural practice, going to the farm, only one day a week rather than more? So I said, well, how will the animals and the plants be taken care of? And their reply, Mr. Speaker, was, well, you could hire more ancillary staff, eh? So this caused a certain disquiet and perhaps intemperance on my part. And my reply was, but you eat 3 times a day, don't you? And there was a strong stiffening of the spine among the students, and they said, sir, we are entitled to that. Well, Mr. Speaker, we're not entitled to have what we don't produce. It's as simple as that. And there is a debilitating attitude which has all kinds of legitimate roots maybe, but which we need to confront, not in an angry fashion, but in a very positive way to encourage our youth to become more amenable to careers in agriculture. Had another instance, Mr. Speaker. 2 of my sons, one is a triple degree in agriculture, another similarly in philosophy. Introducing them to 2 of Jamaica's businessmen years ago. And the immediate reply when they knew of their qualifications was pointing to the one with the expertise in agriculture, oh, he isn't the bright one, is he? There is a prejudice that we face, and it is inhibiting the provision of skilled workers to carry agriculture to the kind of high technical, scientific agriculture of which the minister spoke so eloquently in his presentation, and which can inure so much to the increased productivity of this vital sector of our economy. Mr. Speaker, at the tertiary level, the College of Agriculture at Pacific Gardens is the premier training institution for agriculture. I wish to encourage government to seriously consider increasing the significance of the quotient of the funds for that institution to a bias in favor of agriculture rather than any of the other disciplines that are there. There is a useful intersection now between the University of the West Indies providing educational degrees at COA, but that needs to be extended to a greater range of agricultural competencies. You know, Mr. Speaker, I think I said this in my sectoral contribution, but Jamaica got shortchanged in 1948, you know, when we ceded the Faculty of Agriculture to Trinidad. when we, along with Belize and Guyana, have the largest landmass and the largest potential for agricultural development. We now have to catch up. My proposal is that as early as possible, the government takes steps to charter the College of Agriculture to be a full-fledged university with proper research facilities. And may I say, affirmative action needs to be taken to ensure that students who opt for agricultural careers receive the requisite support by way of scholarships, bursaries, and affordable loans in order to make up the deficit that we have at this time. Mr. Speaker, the College of Agriculture has important linkages, for example, with the A&M University system in Texas, Prairie View and other campuses, and also with Tuskegee. And we need an intentional effort, which I commend to the Minister of Education, to uplift agricultural education at the tertiary level. We no longer can send our scientists abroad in sufficient number in order to have them certified for Jamaican agriculture. We have something to offer, and it requires a particular activity at this time. May I go further, Mr. Speaker, and suggest that the activities of RADA have to be more centrally connected with our schools. And I want to commend to the Minister of Agriculture. He outlined such an ambitious and impressive program of Stricken and the school's participation in the nutrition effort. Can we assign some personnel from RADA to the schools to supplement whatever an agricultural teacher can offer? And in order to give practicality and the opportunity for understanding beyond just simply how to plant the red peas or the callaloo, but actually how it can be prepared, how it can be marketed from the earliest stages of education. There's going to be a prejudice on the part of many of our parents. In many instances, I have visited schools, maybe you have also, where parents, once manual labor is involved for their students, say it's not that they send a picnic to school for. But, Mr. Speaker, if we understand the importance of this sector of our society, we have to be far more devoted to the education and the uplift of science in this regard. Mr. Speaker, do you know that of the nearly 40,000 students who took the CSEC examination this year, as it has been in previous years, less than 10% even attempted one scientific subject of pure science? Happily, there are more students who are taking agricultural science now than before. It is considered to be a relatively easy option. But never mind, that is a good start. But more and more, we have to provide incentives to our students and deal with the cultural reticence that they have in respect of engaging in agricultural education. Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that these measures involve an articulation between the Ministries of Education and Agriculture, but are absolutely necessary at this time so that we can, in fact, have the required personnel for the agricultural takeoff, which is so essential to GDP growth, to improvements in productivity, and to some basic things like the reduction of that almost $1 billion worth of food that we are importing, yes, and the preservation of foreign exchange and the earning of more foreign exchange in respect of our export options. I turn quickly to the second limb of the resolution, which is the access, increasing the access of credit to agriculture in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, as one who has been engaged in agriculture since 1973, let me tell you, gaining credit in agriculture is almost an impossibility. Yes, the state of the People's Cooperative Banks, which were the Drought in that regard, have unfortunately created now where, Mr. Speaker, they are lending more money to buy car than they are on agriculture.
That's so true.
Kudos to Jamaica National, who have made a provision within their loan portfolio for agriculture. It is unfortunately not adequate. Mr. Speaker, recently, the Bank of Jamaica has bestowed largesse upon the financial institutions with, I don't know how much lower the signal rate can go. What is it? 0.75%. Can some of that largesse be targeted directly? It's the people's money, you know. It's the people's money. It's not for their money. It is the people's money. Can that be targeted towards the stimulation of agriculture? The money that is coming from the Bank of the release reserves. Yes? Otherwise, that too, you know, Mr. Speaker, is likely to end up purchasing car and spare parts and more fuel and bleeding out foreign exchange in a bubble which in fact cannot be sustained unless we have it undergirded by productivity in agriculture. So, you know, it is risky. There's absolutely no doubt about the risks involved, but that cannot be beyond our wit. However, we have to achieve that problem, and I put this forward in order that this follow. Serious discourse. We must use the savings of this country in order to lift up production, and particularly in the area of agriculture and processing. Mr. Speaker, there's one area where the risk can be mitigated. I attended recently, I went to church 2 Sundays ago to preach in the marvelous mid-island town of Kelletts, where is a member from North Clarendon. And he pointed out. He wasn't there. He was there. But he's a pillar of it. Mr. Speaker, the point, though, is that the Member of Parliament showed me the impressive planting of tubers and vegetables in the curtilage of Kelletts, but made the point that none of the people there have titles. You know, Mr. Speaker, we don't need more law. We need to use the law we have. The Registration of Titles, Cadastral Mapping and Tenure Clarification Special Provisions Act allows the minister to declare any area and to ensure that titles are issued. Successive governments now are making a mistake, because when you go and ask for this, they require the same regulations that follow the subdivision requirements, which defeat the will of Parliament and the benefit of the nation. The provisions of Section 5A2 in that Act, which provide for a covenant to be listed, to be entered on the title, so that the public authorities are not encumbered with the prospect of infrastructure demands later on, and enjoins those who benefit to make contributions at a later stage. This is being ignored. It is the Registration of Titles, Cadastral Map, and Tenure Clarification. We've done it, you know, Mr. Speaker. We've done it. What we need to do is to use the wisdom and the legislative acumen of our past in order to achieve the objectives of the present. Years ago, former Prime Minister Bruce Golding enunciated public policy that we were going to delink titling from infrastructure. Why have we not done it? We could, if we were to do this intentionally and quickly, we would be in a position, vast numbers of the peasants in a constituency that the Speaker has much familiarity with, could have registered titles, could take these to financial institutions, and whereas there might still be difficulty, they would have an asset that is fungible. Instead of dead assets all around Jamaica, which is what the majority of our small farmer, medium-sized farmer, agricultural land comprises, we could have live assets which could then be used for prudential financial purposes. Mr. Speaker, I really commend it to the House. This is an area with economy. If the issues of improved education and cultural disposition towards agricultural work is taken to heart, and if we improve the access to credit in the ways that I have set out and other ways that others will advance, it seems to me we could make exponential rather than incremental changes to our GDP, to our export earnings, and to the betterment of rural life. It is to these ends that I commend these remarks to this Honourable House, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, We want to thank the member for his contribution. The Minister of Agriculture is not able to complete our response to the member today, but next week he will do that. So we're going to suspend the debate until then. In the interim, we have a report from the Ethics Committee, which will be taken now by the member from Southeast St. Elizabeth and chairman of the committee.
Mr. Speaker, I move that
motion number 38, item 39, item 88, be it resolved that the report of the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives and its deliberation on the motion of exemption brought on behalf of the Member of Parliament from St. Catherine Southern, which was laid on the table of the House on the 14th day of May 2019, be adopted.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that you recommit, you recommit the items starting with announcement, as we had not done so prior to the public business matters that we attended to today. So I ask that you recommit from announcements down to public business to enable the Minister of Finance to deal with matters, announcements by the clerk, and matters of motions given orally and presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained.
Those in favor? Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Ministry Paper number 24 of 2019 and Parish Courts of Jamaica, the Chief Justice Third Quarter Statistics Report 2018, Criminal Matters. Parish Courts of Jamaica, the Chief Justice's Annual Statistics Report 2018. The Indicom Second Quarterly Report, April to June 2018. Annual Report of the Micro Investment Development Agency Limited, MIDA, for the year 2017-2018. Annual Report of the National Solid Waste Management Authority for the years 2015-2016, 2016-2017, and 2017-2018. And appropriation account head is 0300, Office of the Public Defender, 2015-2016.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motion given orally. Dr. Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Income Tax Amendment Act 2019.
Questions and answers to questions.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice at the expiration of 21 days that I'll ask the Minister of Education, Youth and Information the following questions.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motions of which... Actually, no, I'm sorry.
Member,
No. Mr. Speaker, I beg to seek your leave and that of the members of this House to allow me to withdraw the motion standing in my name at item number 10 on the order paper, which relates to the third set of regulations for the Public Procurement Act. There has been a slight, these regulations have the detailed forms that suppliers and others involved in the public procurement process have to fill out. Very detailed registration of approved suppliers for grades 1 to 4, registration of public procurement supply of works for artisans, and the register of approved supplier of goods and general services. Very detailed. And there were a couple of sort of very minor changes to the regulation, to these draft regulations that require them to be withdrawn and retabled. For example, if I'm giving, on page 17, the word contractor was deleted and the word supplier substituted therein. And a change like that requires you can't move an amendment, you have to withdraw it and put it in. And in forms A1, A2, and B, the footnotes with the date references were deleted, and so on. So, Mr. Speaker, I seek your leave and that of the members of the House to withdraw the existing regulations, and once I have your approval, I intend to table the new set of regulations, Mr. Speaker.
Is this the wish of the House? The motion at item 10 is now withdrawn. Mr. Samuro.
So, Mr. Speaker, I beg, you have to recommit announcements and notice of motions given orally, given that the regulations have now been withdrawn, so that I can table the new regulations.
The question is that items, announcements, and notice of motion given orally be recommitted. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Announcements.
Also laid on the table of the House today are copies of the Public Procurement, Registration and Classification of Suppliers Regulations 2019, and this replaces a document table on April 30, 2019.
Notices of motion given orally. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion: that the Public Procurement, Registration and Classification of Suppliers Regulations 2019, laid on the floor of the House on this day, as part of the Public Procurement Act, laid on the House of the floor this day, May 28, 2019, be hereby approved.
Speaker, It is not intended to do any further business today, so I invite you to adjourn this Honorable House until next week, Tuesday at 2 p.m. Thank you very much.
The motion is that the House be now adjourned until next week, Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Those in favor? This House stands adjourned.
Starting January 1, 2019, scandal bags and other plastic bags measuring 24 inches by 24 inches and smaller are banned in Jamaica. Big garbage bags measuring over 24 inches by 24 inches are still allowed.
Must call 1-800-CORRUPT.
Yes!
Enforce the law. One law for all. If convicted and found guilty, lock them up. It's our money that's being wasted. Lock them up. Stop the corruption.